Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure being here and seeing all of you in person. It has been a while. My colleagues from Gazeta Wyborcza, I'm from Gazeta Wyborcza, an independent news outlet in Poland. When I told them about coming to Sofia for this conference, what they told me immediately, it was kind of, this type of unsolicited advice. Like, remember to tell a joke. It's like super important for a moderator to tell a joke, like at least at the very beginning. And it's like, then I looked at the subject matter of our session, and actually there is probably nothing to laugh about. So this is my jokish introduction to this session. And before I introduce our panel guests, I would like to give you a few sentences of what I see is important as a kind of introduction to this discussion. So, from my perspective, it is quite clear that this authoritarian and liberal-minded regimes are becoming increasingly bold when it comes to their efforts to muzzle independent media. And we can see all these quite brutal, often, crackdowns on the press. And they are actually unfolding quite openly across the globe. And of course, we can enumerate places when where it happened, like in Myanmar, when there were 70, I think over 70 journalists being arrested, their licenses were revoked, and even I think internet access was kind of blocked. Very close to me situation in Belarus, where the president. Lukashenko, he actually launched a kind of campaign which criminalized reporting on these fraudulent elections that happened a while ago. And I don't know if you are aware of it, but local watchdogs have recorded over 550 attacks on journalists in Belarus, including hundreds of them being imprisoned. And even now, there are over 50 journalists still in prison, including our colleague from Gazeta Wyborcza, Andrzej Poczbut. And obviously, journalists have been killed in Greece, in Malta, Slovakia, the Netherlands. And what I find quite disturbing is the fact that there is a kind of lack of repercussion, nothing is happening in this area. And it, in my opinion, kind of reflects a wider atmosphere of saying, okay, it's kind of all right, we won't do anything about it. And these authoritarian forces feel that they are maybe not entitled, but they won't be prosecuted because of that. So there is this crackdown on independent media in Hungary and in Poland, and it includes both media capture and legislative activities as well. And what is very interesting, in my opinion, is that it's a kind of disease that is spreading across the region. So it's no longer a matter of a single country. These tactics are being actually copied and implemented by other illiberal democracies. I think that it's quite important to say about one thing, about this media capture situation, because it's a real threat to democracy, and we experienced it quite painfully in Poland. We had a situation a while ago when over 500 local media outlets, which were conglomerated in Polska Presse, they were being bought by a Polish state-owned energy company, Orlen. And what is happening nowadays is that the editors-in-chiefs of these 500, previously independent local media outlets are being replaced by editors-in-chief who are simply kind of favorable, more favorable to the government. And journalists are leaving these outlets, and there is a very important question, what to do with them, because they are left without a job and they would like to be still operative and active in their mission. However, it's quite difficult to resolve this issue, although Gazeta Wyborcza and its foundation might have a solution, but maybe this is something for the later to tell you about. Obviously, there is also this there is also a matter of slaps. We've all already heard about them. A slap, a strategic lawsuit against public participation. Again, in Poland, right now, independent media outlets and journalists have over 140, I think right now it might be even 150 slaps, and over half of them are being actually targeted at Gazeta Wyborcza, the newspaper I work for. So I know it's a kind of bleak list of threats to journalism and journalists, and the situation kind of sounds hopeless, but is it really? I'm really glad that we managed to gather here with amazing audience and our panel members, and I would like to welcome you three. Anna Babinets from Ukraine, who is the editor-in-chief and co-founder of Slidstvo.Info, which is an investigative journalism agency, and you are based in Kiev, right? And Pavol Szalai, who is the head of European Union and the Balkan desk of Reporters Without Borders, but you also have quite substantial experience in covering EU issues like as a journalist. And Alexander Kashumov, who is a human rights lawyer, who has worked in the field of access to information, freedom of expression, privacy and personal data protection since 1997. Right? Welcome all. And I would like to start with stating that, well, despite all these bleak statistics, or like this very bleak picture I just painted to you when it comes to safety of journalists and journalism in general, I have a feeling that Europe is still a pretty safe continent when it comes to at least life of journalists. And I would like to ask Pavol, and in your opinion, as the editors, someone who works for Reporters Without Borders, why and how is it still dangerous to be a journalist in Europe?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much to World Press Institute, America for Bulgaria Foundation, and Association of European Journalists here in Bulgaria, organizing this conference and hosting me here. I think this is really the best place in Europe to organize this kind of conference, given Bulgaria's 112th place, last place in the EU in our World Press Freedom Index. So, as you said, Joanna, Europe is still the safest continent for press freedom in the world. Nevertheless, the differences are huge between European countries. And I just went away for a second from the floor because I forgot the map of World Press Freedom. And I want to show you, I don't know if it will be visible for everyone, but basically there is a white zone on our map, which is the safest for press freedom, the best for press freedom. And since this year, this zone is the smallest since 2013. So it's a white zone on the World Press Freedom map. I'll show you in a second. And it's mostly in Europe. So we can see that really this space for journalism geographically in Europe, it's shrinking. It's not a very big map, but do my best. So this is the white zone. You can hardly see it. Yes, it's mostly northern Europe, in Europe.
And where can we find this map in a PDF format?
You can find it on our website. But just to go very quickly through the main press freedom issues in Europe, you mentioned already some of them. Big issue is trustworthiness of information being blocked by various actors, by states. Journalists have difficulties reporting on the taboo subjects like corruption in Bulgaria or migration in Greece, and this is impeded actively, has been impeded actively in Bulgaria by the state through distribution of public funds, which is discriminatory and non-transparent. I will go back to Bulgaria in a minute. Another big European issue is the hate and incomprehension of journalists against journalists. We have seen it rise with the coronavirus crisis. There have been attacks on journalists in several countries in Western Europe, France, Italy, Germany, Netherlands, also in Central Eastern Europe, in Slovakia, for example. In Slovenia, 20 anti-vaxxers penetrated to the offices of the public broadcaster just a few weeks ago. You mentioned murders of journalists. So unfortunately, the very physical security of journalists in Europe has been threatened. And this year only we had 2 new murders of journalists. In Greece, Georgios Karavais and Peter de Vries in the Netherlands. And the long-lasting problem has been impunity. So in the case of Malta and Slovakia, so Daphne Caruana Galizia, Jan Kuciak, still these murders have not been punished. The persons who ordered them have not been condemned. And finally, the cross-border issue are indeed regimes actively blocking journalists. We believe that Hungary has turned into an anti-model of press freedom in Europe. And it has been inspiring other countries, other allies, political allies of of Fidesz. So this is PiS in Poland and the ruling party SDS in Slovenia, for example, which take some of the Viktor Orban's toolbox to block journalism. Very briefly about Bulgaria, and I can develop later. There is a deep crisis of the right to information in Bulgaria, and I think we need an exit plan which will guarantee trustworthy information and which will support those who produce it and who spread it, the journalists, professional journalists. In a country which is devastated by coronavirus and corruption in the EU funds, also in the national funds, of course, access to trustworthy information about public policies is not only in the interest of Bulgarians, but actually in the European interest, because as you know, coronavirus and even corruption don't know borders. Bulgaria is ranked last in our World Press Freedom Index because it cumulates all the press freedom issues that exist elsewhere in Europe. So I've just mentioned, generally speaking, most of them. And I see 2 solutions. Maybe we can discuss this in more detail later. The EU, of course. some measures have been taken, but others, the really effective measures, will take a long time. It's a marathon. So we need to take the low-hanging fruit, and this is on the national level. Press freedom in Bulgaria, without which we cannot have trustworthy information, must be an absolute priority in the interest of fighting coronavirus, corruption, and other problems in the society. We need to act now before it's too late. And Reporters Without Borders have made recommendations for Bulgaria. We have promoted them before the elections. I have continued in this mission thanks to this invitation to Bulgaria on the ground. And there is no excuse for inaction. There are ideas, there are measures that have been proposed, and they must be simply enacted. And in the end, I will quote Georgi Gospodinov, a Bulgarian writer, a contemporary writer, translated into many foreign languages. And he said, where there is darkness, a miracle always lies sleeping. So I'm optimistic.
Thank you, Pavol, and thank you for your optimism. Anna, would you be equally optimistic when it comes to situation in Ukraine? You are an expert, I would say, in Ukrainian media sector because you are very much active in the area of investigating organized crime and corruption. How would you compare Ukrainian situation with the one in Bulgaria and in other countries, European countries as well?
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting and thank you for organizing this panel, because I think talking about how dangerous journalism in general, it's like every conference panel, and it might look a little bit boring, but I'm happy that we still talk about it. I'm happy that we have possibility to mention journalists, to mention again their names who were killed, crimes which were not solved, because it's important to remind about that even in like our community. So when we talk about Ukraine, and if we compare Ukraine, current Ukraine with Ukraine 10 years ago, of course situation is better now. Especially if we compare Ukraine to Belarus or Russia, current Belarus and Russia, we have really good conditions for independent media, for freedom of press. But it's still possible in Ukraine, killing of journalists, unfortunately. 2 years ago, journalist Vadim Komarov was killed in Cherkasy, and this crime is still unsolved. 5 years ago, Ukrainian, Russian, Belarus journalist Pavol was killed in Kiev. Crime is not solved. 21 years ago, Georgi Gangadze was killed in Kiev. Still 21 years ago, so it's still unsolved crime. So I mean that people who order that still are not punished. We don't know who are there. And I think this is the biggest problem for Ukraine, for regions, that unsolved crimes against journalists. It means when crimes unsolved, it means that it's signal for others that they can do it and they will not be punished. So we as journalists, as investigators in Ukraine, we always do our own independent investigations of crimes against journalists. We feel and we know that it's our responsibility to do that, and we always see that police or other law enforcement, they don't do enough for solving the crimes. What reasons? In every case it's different. So this is the biggest problem we have. And if we're talking about murders, if we're talking about other threats, 1 year ago my colleague Mikhailo Tkach he worked in Radio Liberty in Ukraine. He found out surveillance equipment and he's selling on kitchen. It was 1 year ago, but still, more than 1 year, we still don't know who made this. And it's like, fortunately, he alive. Fortunately, it's not, if we compare with murders, it's not so big crime. But we even, crimes like this don't investigate good in Ukraine good enough. So, I mean, this is the biggest problem. If we are talking about everyday life, everyday work of journalists, we have a lot of problems with cyberbullying, bullying in social networks. When we publish some big stories, when our organization and me published story about President Poroshenko offshore companies that was part of Panama Papers, we had like troll farms, 1,000 people with just created account, texted us like very bad comments, all the things. Sometimes some people who don't like our work, we investigators, of course, mostly people don't like our work. I mean, not audience, but people we cover their crimes. They publish our personal information like phone number, address, and sometimes we have, once I had for 3 days, I had like 300 calls, messages with tweets, with all this stuff. So sometimes we still have this, and I'm sure that it's investigative journalism, it's uncomfortable around the world, not only in Ukraine. But the problem I see that all these crimes, all these threats against journalists are not investigated well. It means that it will go on, it will continue, unfortunately.
And additional question over to you, Anna. I was just thinking whether you have any allies, either like national or international, like institutions or organizations who are actually helping you with your work.
What do you mean, analysis?
Allies, like, you know, organizations that kind of support you and your work. You know, you mentioned something very important, meaning the crimes being left unpunished. And I was just thinking about, you know, the role of national but also international institutions and organizations in helping work like yours.
Actually, we also, Slidstvo.Info, my organization, and few other organization members of OCCRP network, Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. It's a pretty big network of investigative journalists, and they helped us a lot with cybersecurity. When we are in hard situation, when we get threats, we usually have consultation. We can hide our people to other countries, but it's like tactical things, what we do for avoiding risk situation. They help us in everyday work. When we talk about helping with real investigation, Pavol Sheremet murder, when Ukrainian police were investigated, that they invited FBI for helping them, but then in the end Ukrainian police said that they are not qualified enough. So Ukrainian police know how to do it better, but it's 5 years. More than 5 years, still unsolved. So yes, of course, many other international networks and organizations interested, and they help with like tactical stuff, equipment, sometimes with some trainings, with all the things. Yes, of course, and we are very happy that they help us. We visit a conference and to be happy that they help us. But I mean, mostly it's our internal problems that journalists should push police to solve these crimes. That's what we do for more than, I think, almost 10 years as an organization too.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Anna. Since we are talking about solving crimes and also like punishing crimes, it's difficult not to mention the legal framework of journalistic operations in general. And I'm talking about legal framework both in a sense of like national codex, but also like international acts. And so a question over to you, Alexander. You know, I have a feeling that indeed we are more and more kind of rooted in this legislative setup, and it's becoming more and more complicated actually, because when I'm sometimes asked to explain what, for example, I mean how important and why Lex TVN, the famous case in Poland, what it is actually about, it is legally so complicated that, you know, after 2 minutes of me talking, everybody's sleeping, right? Because it's simply too complicated to be delivered to general public in an attractive way and in such a way that they would care. And I find it very, very disturbing. So I would like to ask you, what kind of trends and challenges of using this judicial system against journalism and journalists you see nowadays? You know, I'm thinking about some tools and methods that you find most damaging for media operations and for journalists.
Thank you very much, Joanna. I'd like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to be on this interesting panel. I'm coming from Access to Information Program, which is an NGO, the second oldest in Europe actually, focused on access to public documents. And in the last 20 years, we have helped a lot, many journalists in Bulgaria to fight for better access to documents. And including recently, we successfully fought in courts on behalf of the Association of European Journalists, one of the organizers of this event, to get access to the documents related to police brutality against a journalist during the protest last year in Bulgaria. Stepping on the issue of the threats, indeed, you're right that the situation is complicating all over the world and in Europe, especially the EU legislative framework becomes more and more complicated. So it might be leading us to a sleepy situation, listening to such cases, but it's very important not to fall into sleep, because that would be fatal for free journalistic work and for freedom of expression and the right of the society to listen what's going on. So coming from, as Pavol said, the country which is on the bottom of the list of the ranking, I would summarize some of the issues we face here. And I think that to one or another aspect, they are also common for the EU, although the contexts are quite different as well. So the first and very classical issue is defamation. By the way, you asked me, Joanna, to comment a bit, and I believe we will go on that on the freshly, newly adopted recommendation. And one of the things which is concerning me is that the issues of defamation are missing there. So perhaps it would be good to wish something more action, more effort by the European Commission on this kind of classical threats. We have civil and criminal defamation here, like in most of the EU countries. It is a pity that still we have criminal defamation in Europe. Why? Indeed, in some cases, public prosecutors can start those cases. This is already very exceptional in Europe, fortunately. But even when these cases are started on private claim, they're very cheap for the people who start them, which makes it very easy to oppress journalists and media. And let me tell you that even the very fact that there is a pending lawsuit of defamation is distressing enough. And it has the capacity of remove journalists and media from the focus of their everyday work. So it is very important to keep working on that and on the criminalizing. Another question here is the question of independence of courts and impartiality of judges. In our country, I would say that we have the first, but not exactly the second. In a recent case, many of the journalists we have worked with, prominent journalists in Bulgaria, are also here. Rostem Bosev is one of the biggest, greatest investigative journalists in this country, and he has been convicted by a judge who did not withdraw from the case, although she was subject to a critical publication made by him. Actually, it was a range of critical publications. It's really outrageous for a democracy to have judges who are judging against journalists who have criticized them. Another issue I would mention here, moving to civil defamation, is that here the problem is that courts, unlike criminal judges, are not prepared to think of human rights. Because usually in civil courts, civil and commercial courts, there are civil and commercial issues about money. So for them, 100,000 euro is not a big amount of money very often. However, for a leaflet, especially a local leaflet, somewhere in a small town or city, not only here, but I believe in many other places in Europe and in the world, it's really killing to be sued to pay 10,000 euro. So there is an ongoing issue which is very important to train not only journalists, which will be one of the issues of our discussions, but also judges, because they need to understand what the nature of the cases they face. And one very particular problem here is issuing pre-trial injunctions, which freeze assets and bank accounts of media. And now we have some of those cases. We have Capital, we have Mediapool, and these media, which are among the not so many diligently and fairly reporting on all kinds of issues about corruption, wrongdoings, criticizing state policies here, they can be left for years with freezed bank accounts because of waiting for the final outcome of the case. Some other, very briefly, some other issues. We still have high-ranking politicians and officials bringing cases, and this is done very easily. For example, we had a case started by Mr. Mareshki, who was deputy president of the parliament in the previous 4 years mandate, and a party leader. We have Mr. Mavrodiev, who has been head of different institutions, the Financial Supervision Commission, then the Bulgarian Development Bank, and he's known by a lot of strange things at the time when he was leading those institutions, and at the same time he has been litigating against journalists and media in the last 7 years at least. We have also big businessmen involving in that kind of litigation, like Mr. Krawczyk. We have judges like Mr. Svetlin Mikhailov, and so and so. So these are important issues because, according to the Strasbourg standards on freedom of expression, public officials should face bigger criticism and should not take that kind of lawsuits. But unfortunately, we have a different landscape a bit. Then we have also some other, I would say, not so typical threats. They have grew up in the last decade, perhaps, or the last 15 years. These are freedom of journalist expression versus personal data protection, for example. When we have GDPR now with 20 million possibility of fine, this is the biggest fine in our country. I don't know how it is in Poland or in other countries, but for Bulgaria, this is the biggest existing administrative fine. So it's a threat itself to be potentially subject to that kind of actions. Because of our efforts and the efforts of other good people and organizations in this country, we succeeded with a constitutional case, and the Constitutional Court declared a provision which explicitly mentioned journalistic expression in the Personal Data Protection Act. It was declared unconstitutional, but this does not stop the issue. Because, for example, even today, we have a local leaflet, online leaflet in Silistra, which is under a complaint by a number of members of the local municipal council because of exposing a protocol of a session of a commission in this council with their signatures. Oh, these divine signatures of members of the local council, they are deeply protected by personal data. So we have other issues around the field. We have the Commission of Financial Supervision, which in 2014 started cases against a number of media, but mainly against Capital, because of reporting on the bankruptcy of the fourth biggest commercial bank in Bulgaria at that time, and the omission of the Bulgarian authorities to take proper actions before that. Sorry, just to finish my sentence,
Please
and I see that you have a question. And we should know that there is a regulation of the EU which actually legislates on the field of protection of markets against manipulation, against abuse of markets, and there is a potential threat for journalists reporting on economic issues. So this is something which we should take into account as a common issue, together with the personal data protection issue and together with some other issues which potentially can arise.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Alexander, for this very informative list of threats and potential areas of interest, or which actually should be of our interest as well, not only interest of lawyers and people involved in law. But I wouldn't be myself if I didn't ask you a question about solutions. In my newspaper, people call me like solution maker. They're like, whatever there is a problem, they just come to me, and I'm like giving a solution. And before we go to questions from the audience, but also from our online viewers, I would like very quickly to ask you about, like one or two like immediate things that come to your head when it comes to, I'm not saying about resolving the problem or the issue, but making it maybe at least a bit less acute. So Alexander, I was just thinking, you mentioned it actually, this new recommendation by European Commission. It's like in totality, it's called the Recommendation on the Protection, Safety and Empowerment of Journalists by EC, and obviously it's quite, it's not that very complicated act, but still requires some legal knowledge to comprehend it in 100%. How do you assess it as an attorney of law?
Thank you, Anna. Actually, I think we should be very happy that we have this recommendation on the protection of journalists. First, this shows a very clear devotion of the European Commission and potentially of the European institutions to provide guidelines on the country members and to take a priority of this issue. Some of the issues that are covered are very, very important. For example, access of to public documents is very important because usually, especially in the framework of the EU, this is an issue that is left aside. Unfortunately, for so many years, the EU institutions have been reluctant to legislate on a legal standard on access to public documents. So hopefully, this is a kind of a sign that this will be taken more seriously on board and that the EU institutions will start legislating on this matter, because this has been recognized in 2016 by Grand Chamber of the European Court of Human Rights, where we also gave a submission, amicus curiae, and I'm so happy with that. It has been recognized as a human right, the right of access to public documents, but unfortunately it's not on the legislative framework of the EU. And we should also encourage the Commission to continue with diligently reconsidering other legal documents of the EU that potentially affect journalist freedom, such as the regulation on abusive markets, such as the regulation on the jurisdiction in civil and commercial matters. For example, do you know that there is a Maltese journalist in Bulgaria who is, he's in Malta, he's not in Bulgaria, but he's sued in Bulgaria of a businessman in Varna, by a businessman in Varna, because this businessman has started some business in Malta, and he's unhappy that his business is criticized, and that the outcomes of some bad things have been made public. So he's suing this journalist, but according to the jurisdiction rules in the EU, he can easily sue this journalist in Bulgaria, where the journalist is really much less protected.
Yep, of course.
And the law in Malta is much more favorable for the journalist, but it is not applicable. So very briefly, these are, and of course it should be a work of watching the balance between journalist expression and GDPR, personal data protection. This is also a very, very important issue.
Pavol, what is your intake when it comes to the recently proposed solutions coming from Brussels? And of course, again, I mean, we don't have to talk about recommendation again, but there has been some other ideas presented in the few past days. What do you think about them?
Yeah,
Are they really providing solutions?
Yes. That was the short answer. Now the long answer. So this conference is called New Horizons in Journalism. So I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. I can see the light on the horizon in the EU. These recommendations for the safety of journalists are the light and the end of the tunnel, but the EU must do much more to get to this light. These recommendations, their application must be duly monitored by the Commission, and the Commission must find instruments to make sure that they are implemented. Regarding the slabs, I know that's not the issue addressed in these recommendations in length. The fact is that the European Commission is working on new legislation against SLAPs. It should be proposed in the upcoming months, and it is important that this legislation protects journalists against SLAPs on the European level in cross-border cases, like you just mentioned, but also on the national level in the national cases. There are two other instruments which give us hope. These are the rule of law mechanism and other sort of rule of law measures that are in force already, like the rule of law reports. They will now, as of next year, contain recommendations. So far that they only have been analysis of the problems. And the rule of law mechanism, we hope that it will be deployed as soon as possible. Although, unfortunately, press freedom is not a criterion officially considered in this rule of law mechanism. So, as you know, von der Leyen, in her last week's speech, announced the Media Freedom Act. I mean, it was announced also before, but she mentioned it again. This act has to be ambitious. It has to be comprehensive, wide-ranging. We, Reporters Without Borders, will make recommendations on what we think is important, but I just want to say here that unless this Media Freedom Act addresses press freedom issues in Bulgaria, it will not. So if it won't address issues in Bulgaria, it will not be relevant, because we are really in a country where you can see all the problems existing elsewhere.
Yeah, in a nutshell. Anna, and over to you now. I was just wondering whether the project you work in, this organized crime and corruption reporting project, have you actually maybe drafted or like designed any recommendations when it comes to what should be done on different levels to secure the protection of journalists?
Yes, actually in every country it's different subjects, different topics, more dangerous, less dangerous. If talking about Ukraine, the most dangerous, and I think about a lot of countries, the most dangerous to investigate mobsters, criminals, mafia, because they don't have reputation. If we compare with politicians, politicians at least have reputation. They have something to lose. Mafia, mobsters have nothing to lose. So the most risky, the most dangerous stories in Ukraine and many countries, it's investigations against mobsters. So when we work on stories like this, of course, we understand everything, and we try to make some steps to avoid danger. So first, it's cybersecurity. Journalist smartphone can open all information about what we're working about, and of course before publishing we should really care about cybersecurity, about we have rules of meeting with who help, and when we talk by phone, when we talk by signal, when we talk by messenger, so it's a lot of detailed things. Second is if you get threats, if some people try to push you don't publish or tell you that you have criminal problem in future. We had this. One of way is to show that people, that you or your organization is not only one which have access to important information. It means that if they will do something against you, they will not stop information. They should understand that. So if we talk to people who try to make you don't publish, we should show them that in one case, we told some people who tried to push us, we told them, sorry, maybe we would negotiate, but information already in our partners in Washington, so we can't stop this. So I mean, recommendation, don't tell them, how did you think that I can do something? Yes, I mean, not be very strict. Just tell that information is not only on my hand. It's very helpful. And third is to investigate crimes against journalists by ourselves. Because in many countries like Ukraine and others, people see that police will not investigate, will not punish the people who ordered murder or threats against journalists. When we as journalists, sometimes when we have international team, sometimes internal team, if we investigate, we can show criminals that we can find something, and it works around the world. We have cases, we have examples when journalists found much more than police. And it's I mean, for us it's good signal, for us it's good practice to show that people that they should stop, because police very often can't do this signal.
Thank you. Let's open this exchange of ideas and overlooks of the situation to our audience, and let's start with the audience present in this room, whether there are questions from you. Yes, please. Do we have a microphone? Okay.
Does it work? Yeah, I don't know. Maybe. Ontario. My question is it possible to support journalists maybe from abroad or for countries where it is safer and there are foundations and so on, in countries where journalism is much more risky, without putting them in danger, maybe for Pavol or for other actors, or how to do it?
Yeah, that's a difficult question. I think when you look in Europe, there are countries supporting journalists abroad. A great example is Lithuania. So Lithuania hosts many Belarusian journalists, and we, Reporters Without Borders, filed a criminal complaint with the Lithuanian prosecutor against, for the hijacking of Roman Protasevich on the flight from Greece to Lithuania, and the Lithuanian authorities have accepted this complaint and are also following other, of course, complaints investigating this, and Lithuania is very actively supporting Belarusian journalists, and I have to say that there are a lot of journalists from Belarus also in Poland, and when I was in Poland 2 weeks ago, I was trying to explain to my partners that it's really great that they are supporting Belarusian journalists, and that's why I don't understand why they are suppressing press freedom in their own country, the authorities, I mean. And the parents of Roman Protasevich are in Poland. So this is a newer EU member country, and it's really an example to follow. But of course, Western countries like Netherlands, Scandinavian countries, through their embassies and funding, are supporting journalists, media. It is important that when financial funding is given, that it be distributed according to some transparent, objective and clear criteria, which are not political, so that the media in that target country are not labeled as defending interests of that donating country. I hope I answered your question.
Just a little bit to add. There are at least two models I know. One is media associations or NGOs that are supported to do long-term work in these countries. And the other model is the model of legal defense centers, which are giving a small amount of money for a particular case to be defended. In a country, perhaps either of these models have its advantages, but perhaps it is better to have a more sustainable, long-lasting model. Of course, it depends on the country, because there are countries where it is really very, very difficult to maintain NGOs like that.
Mm-hmm. Maybe I'll just share with you a situation from Poland, actually, and it is related with supporting our colleagues in Belarus. Not only because we have always had quite close ties with Belarusian media, but also because we somehow understand to a certain degree, of course, their situation. We wanted to organize some more substantial help for them, not only kind of moral support and some call for actions in our newspaper being published, but also something more of say financial nature. And then we were faced with a very difficult situation, meaning that there is practically no way of sending money to media or journalists in need in Belarus. Like, money transferring is very much limited. So if you want to make a real change and to actually support your colleagues in Belarus, what you have to do is you have to actually physically cross the border and hand the money practically by yourself. There are two organizations actually that are helping with this situation. However, their activities are, under surveillance right now, and it's becoming more and more dangerous for them to operate, actually. So this is, yes, what we can do also as a community of journalists. Sometimes we can do a lot, sometimes moral support. This feeling of solidarity is very important. We feel it as, journalists in Poland. It gives us lots of power and belief. in better future. However, sometimes something more is important, and I think is needed. And it is important to remember that there needs to be like practical solutions to do that. Maybe one more question from our online audience. It's actually, the question is focused on Bulgaria. You are probably aware that Bulgaria's position in the Reporters Sans Frontières ranking has provoked backlash in Bulgaria by media controlled by certain circles, but also by other journalists who refuse to accept the evaluation of the media landscape in the country. Do you face such issues in the region or other EU countries? How would you explain this denial? So I guess this might be over to you, Pavol, but also over to you, Anna. Did you, Anna, notice a similar reaction in Ukraine when, you know, criticism against media practices is being raised?
I think that in Bulgaria, the aggression that we have encountered regarding the index has been the greatest in the EU. There are other countries, other regimes in Europe which try to pretend as if we did not exist. Nevertheless, we are open to dialogue with institutions, and in other countries we are engaged in providing our international expertise for taking specific measures to improve press freedom. You know, the problem in some countries, for example, like Poland, is that the journalistic community is extremely divided, and you have there is a pro-government journalists association that criticizes us very harshly, and then there is an independent or several independent journalist associations, and I think that we need to be constructive. We have always tried not only to name and shame, but also to propose solutions. And I mean, this is a message for everyone who says that we are just trying to, we are destructive. We're not.
And shaming others. Anna, how about Ukraine? Any signs of backlash or?
Actually, we see attempt from government, from some people to divide journalists too, for like real journalists and not real journalists. We are independent media. We mostly financed by donors organizations. It's only one possibility to be independent media in Ukraine, to make independent investigations, because mostly our media are owned by oligarchs, so they follow some interests. And we see for last year our government and some people try to push some law about register of journalists, and just real journalists will be there and they can go to press conference, all these things. And like journalists like we are, they call us activists or they call us not journalists, but when they try to sue us, they count us as a journalists. So they want to make some rules to have like controlling this stuff. But fortunately in Ukraine we have not bad community of journalists. I mean, I can't say that it's perfect, of course, we have work to do. But there are some organizations which tries and which do a lot for stopping this, because we understand that this dividing to like real journalists, not real journalists, it will create a lot of problems. We will be underground journalists. I mean, I can say that there are some real big problem with freedom of press in Ukraine, like in Russia or Belarus, but still we see that government authorities want to find some mechanism to control journalists, to separate, to show, to tell us what to do, because of course mostly independent media, small independent media are not comfortable for them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I guess we don't have time for another question, but maybe we don't have time. Okay, so we if there is one more short question from audience here, we might take it. But if there is not, I would thank you, my my interlocutors, Anna, Alexander, Pavol. It was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.